Hi everyone, my name is Stephen. I work in OSINT, but I came to OSINT from an academic background. I have a PhD in history. So basically, my talk is about the parallels, lessons, and insight for OSINT coming to the field from the social sciences and humanities. And so my talk is basically divided up into two general sections. The first section is practical lessons from archival research, and this includes some resources and digital archives that I've come across working in social science and humanities, as well as some software tools that I've learned to use. I also touch on the importance of building your own archive. I know this has been a topic addressed here, but I think thinking about archives is really key to at least the historical research, and I think also for OSINT research. And then I'm going to touch on some methodological insights from historical research. That includes thinking critically about how archives structure our findings, how the structure of archives and the sources within them can shape what we find and how we can find it. And I'm also going to touch on some interpretive insights, reading archives against the grain, what is being said, what isn't being said, and also I'm going to conclude with some thoughts about authoritative sources. And I apologize, I'm not going to be able to get to all of my slides. I tend to over-prepare, I guess, so I have too many slides here. But if you have any questions, please feel free to talk to me. I'd love to talk about this. Okay, so my background is I am the senior investigator at Brown Rudnick, which is a corporate law firm with offices around the United States. We also have some offices overseas. It's kind of one of those ripped from the headlines law firms. I can't really talk about any cases, but if you Google Brown Rudnick, you'll see that there's like an awful lot of media about the firm. And I come to the field from completing my PhD in history. I just finished my dissertation 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago at UC Davis. The topic of my dissertation is the Second World War in North Africa. Even more specifically, it is on the experience and memory of British and German soldiers who fought in North Africa. So obviously, I have some sort of pathological interest in history, so if anyone wants to talk about World War II, I'm always down to talk about World War II. I'm clearly kind of insane. And I developed my OSINT background at Quilligence LLC, which is a boutique research, business intelligence, and research firm. And I sort of fell into it while I was in grad school. It's kind of funny how that works. I just basically met someone, we got to talking, and then I got to subcontracting business intelligence and OSINT research. And that's sort of the genesis of this talk. Like, basically, I ended up in this situation where I was working on my dissertation. I was set up in Britain. Most of my research was in Britain and Germany. And I would spend all day at like the UK's National Archive or the German archive in like Freiburg or Berlin. And then I would go back to my Airbnb and I would spend all evening doing OSINT research. And I was using the money I made subcontracting OSINT research to pay for my academic research because academic research is, of course, notoriously underfunded. So, and that brings me, and so basically, I came to realize there are a lot of general parallels between the way OSINT research can be performed, depending on your project, and academic research. You start out an academic project by finding a gap in the previous research. You read the secondary literature. Basically, you familiarize yourself with a topic, and then you find a gap. You find something interesting that hasn't necessarily been exploited fully. And that can only really come with some familiarity, right? You read a few books, let's say, on the Second World War in North Africa, you'll find references to maybe an individual or a source or an event that, you'll start doing your own searches for that individual source or event, and you'll find out not that many people have been talking about it. And then you say, this is an interesting project. This is an interesting research question. You identify your sources, your archive. You ask the question, you figure out where the answers to that question might be, and then you go and conduct your research. Now, with OSINT, you're finding a gap in the previous research can be just like search engine results, it can be Wikipedia. You don't want to, if you're investigating, say, like a person, a business, whatnot, you don't want to be reinventing the wheel, You are going to be, you want to find out what other people have been saying, then you focus on that, you see if there's anything interesting to pivot, and you go and conduct you formulate your research question, and based on your research question, you identify relevant sources, and those sources could be, social media, could be anything, and then you go on, you conduct your research, and you present your findings. So it's just sort of like a broad parallel there. And so you can see, there are these sort of broad parallels in the research process, generally focused on archives. And so that brings me to the sort of the first general section here, which is practical lessons from archival research. Now, archival research is really what historians do. It's like the bread and butter of historians' work. And archives are, the way historians use archives is basically archives as generally understood. Like that's a picture of the UK's National Archive, which is worth a visit for just about anybody. It's like really nice. It has a cafe inside. Some archives are basically in the back of a bunker, like the German military archive is like in a military installation surrounded by barbed wire. But this one's really nice. But I think we can think of OSINT, the sources of our information for OSINT as also being archives. And so state and other public archives are historians' most important resources. And these are some of the databases that I learned to use as a historian. The first one I've got there is Archive Grid, which is basically a database of archives in the United States. It's really fantastic. There are thousands of archives listed there. You can even just sort by location. You can find an archive that happens to be in your area if you want to just check out what archival holdings happen to be nearby. I know near where I live in Massachusetts, it turned out there was an archive with Nathaniel Hawthorne's personal writings, and you can just go there, basically. You can just call them up or send them an email, check out archives if you just happen to be interested. But from an OSINT perspective, there can be items, objects, and texts deposited in archives that have real contemporary relevance, not just for, personal interest or academic interest. So the example I've got here is Trump Entertainment. I did a little search under Archive Grid for Trump Entertainment. You can see the University of Nevada in Las Vegas happens to have a collection of promotional materials and reports from Trump Entertainment. I did a little search for local business Lockheed Martin, and you can see there are decades and decades of papers from Lockheed Martin deposited in the University of Minnesota. And of course, people aren't going to be just depositing whatever in an archive. They're going to be reviewing them for anything embarrassing most of the time. But honestly, you never know. And one of the advantages of going to a physical archive, if there happens to be anything of interest for whatever research project you're working on, is that a lot of the things that are held by these archives are not digitized. And increasingly many things are, but it's never going to be the case that everything in these archives is digitized. So the advantage of physically getting up and going to an archive to look at items that have not been digitized is that it's a pain in the butt, and so there's a really good chance nobody else has bothered to do that. So you're going to be finding something new, I would say like 99% of the time. And the other examples I've got here, National Archives are basically the American Federal Archives. They're not too far from here. They're sort of located in this general area. Archives Hub is the UK version of Archive Grid, and it is actually way better. It integrates like a ton of obscure local archives all over the UK, so I'm really familiar with that one, as well as the UK's National Archive. And all these links are going to be online. I don't expect, this is, I'm going to be sort of skimming through a lot here. Oh, but the most important one here, in my opinion, is WorldCat. So WorldCat is basically what it sounds like. It is the biggest database of library and archival holdings in the world. It contains something like 900 million individual files, 900 million individual files, because it connects tens of thousands of library catalogs and databases together and is searchable. And it includes, so when you type in a keyword into WorldCat, you're going to find books, ebooks, manuscripts, archival holdings, DVDs, microfilm, microfiche, all that classic stuff that nobody thinks about anymore. You can find CDs, journal articles, newspaper articles. And the other advantage of that is and the other advantage of using WorldCat is you can sort by location. So if there's an item that isn't only located in one part of the world, you can find out where the nearest library that actually has it. And then you can, and even if it is farther away, you can use your local public library to submit an interlibrary loan request. And that brings me to my next point, which is that university and public libraries are absolutely invaluable, probably the most valuable resource for historians, or at least for social science and humanities research. And we use them extensively. So there's college and university libraries are quite possibly the most valuable of those. And they can be a little bit more difficult to get access to because they're generally restrict privileges to students or faculty. But I find that you can generally just show up there and say, hey, I'm an independent researcher. Just what are your options for visiting scholars and independent researchers? And pretty much everybody is an independent researcher. Like that's a really sort of broad category of human. So you can do that. You have to get up and go there. But I find that public libraries are shockingly useful for this for both academic and OSINT research. Now, I'm a member of both the New York Public Library and the Boston Public Library because I used to live in New York and now I live in Boston. And you can just basically show up and get full library access with a piece of paper that says you happen to live in New York or Massachusetts, respectively. But a lot of libraries have e-card services. I'm including a link to a list of libraries with non-resident borrowing privileges. So it's very simple to get access to the kinds of resources that these public libraries offer. And they're generally not in the business of turning people away. I mean, they're very, very helpful. And so through these libraries, you get access to unbelievably powerful media databases. I listed EBSCO, ProQuest, and Gale there. Those are not exactly databases. Those are sort of companies that sell databases, sell database product packages to libraries. And they're kind of mind-blowing, like the resources you get through them. You get centuries of periodicals. I think, like the New York Public Library's EBSCO database had something like 30,000 periodicals that you could search through with keywords, that kind of a thing. You also will generally get access to genealogical services like Ancestry, and so there's a few others, obviously. Newspapers.com is linked to Ancestry, which has century of local newspapers. Through Ancestry, you'll get yearbooks, things like that, which are really fun when you're, as well as marriage and birth records, which are fun when you're trying to track someone down. And so you use these resources to kind of build your own archive, to download whatever resources, download whatever findings that you can stir up. And this sort of brings me to my next point about underutilized resources is building a lesson that I learned working as a historian is the importance of building your own archive. So you can see right there, I've got a little screenshot from my British Archive directory, which which is basically the photos I took when I was working on my dissertation in Kew, the British Archive. You can see there I took 27,000 photos and 212 gigabytes, which sounds really psychotic. But basically, I didn't have time to be there forever, so I would sit down, I would take pictures all day, I would put them together in, I would take my notes, I collected all these photos, then I went home, and I plugged the directory, or I plugged the photos I happened to take that day into EXIF tool, which divided them up by timestamp. Then I sorted them into subdirectories based on the particular archival file that they came from. So you can see there I've got 275 folders. And then I would run them through OCR tools. So some OCR tools that I used were Google OCR, which was through Google Drive. Simple OCR is a free one. Honestly, the best one that I've used is Abby Fine Reader. It does cost money. I'm not sure exactly how much, but you can get a 7-day free trial if you don't have some sort of massive research project that you're working on. I think it's pretty good. I mean, you can also use Adobe. You can also use Adobe if you happen to have an Acrobat subscription, but I think that one's kind of lousy. But building your own archive isn't just about files and documents. It can be about websites and social media. So I find that making a copy of the web, you never know what's going to be there tomorrow, is also hugely useful for OSINT purposes. The tools I found to be helpful are HTTrack, single file. The forensic OSINT tool I've just started using is really valuable for building your archive of web and social media content. I also happen to use Hunchly, even though it is a paid tool, but it's also really simple and easy to use. So I'm kind of lazy in that regard, so I'll just use Hunchly to make copies of the web. But another example of building your own archive from history and social sciences to OSINT is a little technique for making a copy of someone's deleted tweets. So I was going to use as an example Alex Jones's Twitter account, but just about every terrible Twitter personality, Alex Jones's Twitter account has been reinstated. It was actually kind of a challenge to find a Twitter account that was like a public person whose Twitter account was still banned from Twitter thanks to Elon Musk's activities. But I'm using the example of Raul Castro here. So basically, what this process does is it allows you to create your own private, local indexed copy of deleted tweets. It could be, thousands of deleted tweets that you can then search using your own software. You can use the doc fetcher, which I'm going to show. And I know that the Wayback Machine, the advantage of this is that the Wayback Machine doesn't allow you to search within archives. It doesn't let you search within the Wayback Machine. A lot of stuff on the Wayback Machine has been indexed by Google, but not everything. And so I think this is a pretty powerful way of exploring deleted tweets. So first you find the Twitter account. You can get the URL that it would operate under. You check it on the Internet Archive. You can use what'smyname.app if you want to. From OSINT Combine, very useful tool. You plug it in, you see how many there are. Then I use this software called the Wayback Machine Downloader, which is looks like it's pretty old at this point, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I plug it in, you plug in the URL, it downloads automatically everything under that URL. So in this case, it was 20 items. But the default settings only pick up successful captures by the Wayback Machine. And of course, if you're looking at someone with 100,000 tweets, you can use some modifiers to choose just time and date stamps, that kind of a thing. Then I use something called doc fetcher to create an index, a searchable index of these deleted tweets. It's free software. I really like the sort of crazed look on the squirrel's face for this. And you right-click, you create an index from the folder of downloaded tweets, And there you have it. You have an indexed directory, searchable index directory with all the images and everything, and it really comes together very nicely of deleted tweets, in this case from Raul Castro. And you can see I just have it in the downloads folder. And with the time I have left, I'm going to talk a bit about related archival, related insights from archival research, thinking about archives and sources. So basically this section is going to talk about how we as OSINT practitioners can learn from the ways archival sources shape our investigations, as well as some insights about source interpretation and analysis. And I'm going to conclude with a little bit on the use of authoritative sources. So basically, what we learn as historians is that archives are not neutral storehouses of information. Saving, preserving, and archiving is really creative work. There's nothing sort of neutral and natural about how archives work. If you're looking at a federal or a state or governmental archive, what it collects is, in addition to, the sort of the details of what it's collecting, like census records, memos, that kind of a thing, which can be interesting, they can be interesting in their own right, but they're also, the archives are sort of a resource for looking, let's say a governmental archive is really a resource for understanding how the government sees society, right? A governmental archive is a resource for seeing like a state in its own way. That's how, the way the archive categorizes it really tells you a lot about the archivist. And so what we try to focus on as historians is not just what is included by the archive, but what is excluded from the archive. We try to read the archives and the sources within them against the grain, with an eye for the context behind their creation and that sort of a thing. And so search engines, as a kind of archive, as one of the main archives used for OSINT, are a key, like a real example of this, a really relevant example of this. I mean, we know that Google and Bing are not neutral. They are not neutral arbiters or not neutral resources for what happens to be out there on the internet. Their search engine, search results in Google and Bing are governed by algorithms, by commercial incentives, by paid advertising, by all their complex and opaque ranking systems, by backlinks, by there's an entire search engine optimization industry. And so, and the example, the counterexample I have here is Wibby, which is kind of like a search engine for the old web. It's like, it's just fun. It's not really useful for OSINT, but it's basically like if you happen to grow up in the late 90s or early 2000s as an internet nerd like I did, you're going to find like old GeoCities pages and things like that. Like you can search for Star Trek and what'll come up is Captain Kirk versus Picard. And, but the reason I bring it up is because it's not, it's barely, any more artificial than the Google and Bing search results. Only a little bit more artificial than Google and Bing search results. And so what I want to talk about then is reading, trying to read, search engines against the grain. The example I have for that are the Lumen database and Google Transparency Report. So if you Google the Google Transparency Report, you'll find basically this includes pretty vast selection of URLs that have been requested to be delisted from Google. You can see here it was, 8 billion URLs have been requested to be removed from Google. 5 million specific domains and about 500,000 requesters, copyright requesters. And so you can sort of you can look through that. You can search for like a domain of interest to see if someone has requested that content has been taken down, or that content be delisted from Google that's associated with that particular domain. So you can sort of read things against the grain that way. You can try to figure out if you can sort of read that to find out if a company owns particular copyrighted material. They're generally not going to be requesting takedowns for material that they don't own, although that does happen. You can also sort of rule out a relationship. You can say, well, they're not going to be submitting a takedown request if they happen to already own that website, so you can rule out that kind of a connection. And there's even more detail in the Lumen database, which is, I think it's like a nonprofit organization run by Harvard Law, where they get a bunch of these copyright takedown requests sent over, and you can look at them in even more detail. You can submit one full request per day as just a random person, which will get you the complete URL and like detailed information about the requester. And you can use that to take a look at all sorts of things. Like you can search for an individual's name, you can search for an alias. You might find out that, it turns out this person was trying to have certain websites removed from search engine results because it happened to use a previous name that they operated by or a previous alias. And then once you get the actual URL, you can plug that into the Internet Archive, and there you go. You found something that someone tried to erase from the internet. I'm going to skip that one. I don't have time for that one. And that brings me, so sort of thinking about archives brings me to thinking about, relatedly to thinking about sources, thinking about how we engage with sources, trying to read sources themselves, not just archives, against the grain. So we try to, as historians, we try to look for what's being said and what isn't being said. Language and socio-cultural context matter. You need to be familiar with the topic that you are researching. I mean, no one expects you to, if you're working on like Russian and Ukrainian sources, no one's going to, and you don't speak those languages, no one's going to be expecting you to be an expert overnight. But you should try to be aware of your limitations. Try to, do the best that you can, right? So the example I have of history of this not going well is this person, Naomi Wolf, who's an activist and scholar, who had a book coming out a few years ago. And there was a sort of scandal here made international headlines because she was making the argument that a large number of people had been executed for sodomy in 19th century Britain. And the piece of evidence that she used was the phrase death recorded, which appeared in court documents from 19th century Britain. And that was sort of one of the core arguments in her book. Now, as it turned out, death recorded did not mean that those people had been executed, and it was sort of like an administrative reference for meaning that the death sentence had actually been commuted. So in fact, death recorded meant the opposite. So that's sort of an example of thinking carefully about the way our sources, thinking carefully about reading our sources and understanding the context behind the creation of our sources. So Wikipedia is another sort of straightforward example of how you can read sources against the grain. Try to look for what is being said and what isn't being said. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the fact that Wikipedia has pages in multiple languages. You can look at, there'll be different information in certain languages. Sometimes it actually makes sense to look at a Wikipedia page for an English language topic in a foreign language, because you can, sometimes if information has been removed, it will appear in one language and not the other. There's the revisions page, which includes sort of like a list of changes to the Wikipedia page. And the talk page is also pretty useful, because that's sort of like a little mini message board for the Wikipedia page. Now, the example I have here of using sort of reading Wikipedia against the grain is a year ago. It turned out that this guy, Mike Lawler, there was an article in the Daily Beast about this guy, Mike Lawler, who was a U.S. House representative from New York, had been editing his Wikipedia page. And they found it out because you can see right there, Michael V. Lawler was making edits to the Mike Lawler Wikipedia page. He made 26 edits to his own Wikipedia page. And so beyond being just sort of like embarrassing, for Mike Lawler personally, you get to, it gives you an insight into the construction of the source, into how Mike Lawler wanted to be seen, the sort of, what he wanted to prioritize and what he wanted to, de-emphasize about himself. And the last thing I want to talk about is authoritative. The main thing that historians use Wikipedia for is authoritative sources. We usually go straight to the citations and the bibliographies. We try to find, the primary source for information, and we try to emphasize authoritative sources that have real weight. Now, authoritative sources, what is an authoritative source can really depend on what you are working on, what your topic is. I mean, if your topic is the evolution of someone's personal opinions over time, then their social media account is obviously going to be a primary source, an authoritative source for that. But if you're looking at other sources of information, like academic publications are a really valuable authoritative source, governmental records are really important, corporate and regulatory filings, including copyright, trademark, and patent records, I find to be very helpful. And what's good about corporate, regulatory, and legal records is they have real weight to them. They have legal weight to them in that providing false information or falsifying them can lead to real criminal penalties. So those I find to be very, very valuable. And domain registrations less so, but I think I put them under authoritative sources because you'll find I find a lot of the time that historic domain registrations contain information that is scrubbed later on. That's like change over time right there. So one example, the example I want to conclude with of bringing together these authoritative sources is the 2022 Washington Post expose of the Libs of TikTok Twitter account. And I'm never going to call it X, it's Twitter forever. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Libs of TikTok is this sort of really transphobic, homophobic, really really terrible Twitter account that's still active. And the person behind it has become a public figure, so I'm not doing anything, not like doxing anyone or anything. But I mean, it's been linked to deaths, harassment, all sorts of things. So using these sort of authoritative sources, in this case, domain registrations and patent and trademark searches, this, Taylor Lawrence, the reporter of the Washington Post, along with some people on Twitter, basically were able to figure out just right there who the person was who operated the Twitter account, operates, and links to other individuals. So looking up, you can see here that libsoftiktok.us was registered initially by an individual named Haya Rychik. It had her address, phone number, email address, and then of course, it was later updated to an anonymizing service. So just right there, you find out who's behind it. Then it was also discovered that the Libs of TikTok was a registered trademark through the trademark search of the United States Patent. Actually, I can't remember exactly what the office is, but USPTO. And it was registered to a guy named, Grant Lally. And the Post described Grant Lally as a kind of political operative associated with a particular political party. So right now you have a connection between, a formerly anonymous individual and a major political party. And then, about a month or two later, the Palm Beach Post discovered that Libs of TikTok LLC had a foreign registration. So it's a Delaware entity. In Delaware, corporate registrations are almost impossible to get any information out of. But there was a foreign Florida registration for the Libs of TikTok LLC. And it turns out that within this registration, they could find out that this guy, Seth Dillon, was manager for the Libs of TikTok LLC. And Seth Dillon, as it turns out, is the CEO of the Babylon Bee, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but that is a sort of conservative alternative to the Onion. So just from these three authoritative records, we can see a network between a formerly anonymous social media account, a political party, and a media outlet. And happy to answer any questions you might have if there's time.